Hey, DawgNation, I'm Brandon Adams. Happy Thursday to you. April 1st, April Fool's Day. I can promise you this. We are not going to do any kind of April Fool's stuff here. I don't think we ever have. If we ever do an April Fool's thing, I want it to be like a really big thing. But today we have none of that. My kids love it. It's like all they could do this morning was, constant April Fool's jokes. There's a lot of this kind of stuff in the sports media. Most of that stuff is sort of played out. But nonetheless, we are happy to have you. And that is no joke. We are happy to have you here for this April 1st edition of DawgNation Daily, presented by our friends at Merriweather and Tharp. Loaded today. Terence Edwards, former Georgia wide receiver, obviously close with Jermaine Burton. We'll get the latest on Burton's situation, what now appears to maybe not be as serious an injury as it could have been. We'll also get more information on today's show from a medical standpoint from Dr. Brad Register. Very, very cool guy in that he's an orthopedic surgeon based in Athens, but he's also a former UGA letterman. So this is a guy who understands kind of like the football part of all of this and the medical part of all of this. We'll talk to him about Burton. We'll talk to him about George Pickens and his ACL injury recovery. And, of course, a little bit of an update on kind of a year later now for JT Daniels in terms of what his prognosis is for even healthier 2021 and maybe even more impactful on the field because of all of that. And he'll even tell us the story about how he went from being a Georgia football player to a, Johns Hopkins Medical School graduate orthopedic surgeon back here in Athens. It's a really cool story and a good guy. So that's all coming up on today's show. But we begin with this, and we'll do it in just a moment. Some big-time praise for Georgia for ushering in what I think is a positive change for the sport. What do you say we start there now? It's DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. It's presented by Merriweather and Tharp, and it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Merriweather and Tharp, your source for Georgia divorce. Find them online at theatlantadivorceteam.com.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
We are incredibly busy on today's show. Couple guests for you coming up. Dr. Brad Register, Athens-based orthopedic surgeon, former UGA letterman, will give us some insight into the injury recovery for George Pickens, the timeline on all of that, the situation with Jermaine Burton, and obviously what now appears to be better news than it otherwise could have been. We'll do all of that with Dr. Register later on in today's show. Really nice to have medical expertise because goodness knows I have none of that. So good to be able to get that from him later on the show. That's exactly what we'll do. Of course, Terence Edwards, the former Georgia wide receiver, he will join us on today's show there as well. Terence is close with Jermaine Burton, as a guy that's trained Burton, and we'll kind of find out from him kind of how all of this is going, as Jermaine maybe now still in pretty good shape for UGA after the scare earlier this week of the injury situation. So we'll talk to experts both in terms of Burton as a player and the medical situation for all these guys before we're done here today. DawgNation Daily, presented by Merriweather and Tharp. Let me begin, though, with this. There's a lot of stuff in college football that's about kind of bragging about some sort of innovation you've brought to the sport. And some of this kind of stuff kind of gets silly. The other day you had Tennessee sort of bragging about sports bras for their players, which I thought was kind of strange, but nonetheless, there's a lot of, hey, we're leading the way in doing this. And sometimes that's facilities based. Look how nice our building is. Sometimes that's like sports science based. Look how much we know about our players. And all of that makes a lot of sense. You can understand why programs would want to tout that. This idea that we're doing it better than anybody else in terms of leading the way on something. But sometimes this kind of stuff sort of means more than others. And sometimes there's this race to say, well, so-and-so is copying us. We actually did this first. And as an example of like the silliness related to some of this kind of stuff, remember when Notre Dame game for Georgia in 2019, there was the LED lights. It was the first night game since Georgia had these new lights put in. It was kind of a cool, scene. The atmosphere around the stadium was unbelievable, and everybody was having a good time with that. CBS certainly loved televising that game, and it was a big Georgia win over the Fighting Irish. The crowd was obviously raucous the entire time. Everybody seemed to enjoy it, with the exception of the folks at Alabama who said, but we've got LED lights, and we had ours first, and Georgia's just copying us, which is like the dumbest, most childish thing you could ever hear. But you remember Alabama fans and Alabama, some folks even maybe within kind of the institutional framework saying, we had the LED lights, Georgia just copied us. Georgia then had to furnish receipts to say, no, we didn't copy anybody when it comes to these LED lights. But the point here is that's how serious this stuff gets taken from time to time. Who's copying whom when it comes to the big innovations in college football? And that's one of the reasons why Georgia getting credit for something in particular, I think it may not be all that important necessarily, but it's probably worth bragging about a little bit. It's probably worth patting yourself on the back if you're a Georgia fan. Just a little bit of a sense of pride that in one particular instance, a true innovation from the University of Georgia that seems to, in my mind, be having a positive impact on how college football is going to be played going forward. Yesterday, on SEC Country Live. And by the way, so many of you have been so kind to say nice things about the return of that show. We're doing it every Wednesday now, 3 p.m. on the SEC Country video channels, SEC Country on Facebook, SEC Country Live on YouTube. So many of you have had so many nice things to say about that, and I can't tell you how much I appreciate that. Show's a ton of fun to do. I'm really proud to be a part of it, and really so thankful for so many of you who've tuned in for it. But the point is, on the show yesterday, we had Mr. College Football Tony Barnhart, who you've seen for years in the SEC Network, who's been, veteran college football writer, just a tremendous, I would say, historian for the SEC, but also tremendous voice, analyst still covering the SEC right now is Tony Barnhart. Great stuff. And we're talking about, kind of the new scheduling model that seems to exist in college football. And that was furthered again yesterday when Georgia announced a home-and-home with Louisville coming up. And the fact that you have this going on, but also maybe a push by the SEC to have a little bit more aggressive scheduling model maybe within the conference itself. And Tony, who covers the entire SEC and covered all of college football for a long time, says he really thinks that when you look at what has led to this new aggressive idea of scheduling in place, Tony says a lot of the credit for that should actually go to the University of Georgia and its coach, Kirby Smart. This is what Tony Barnhart said yesterday on SEC Country Live about how it is that we got to a place where aggressive scheduling is now the norm in college football. Good stuff from Tony. Listen to this.
The athletic directors are hearing it from their fans. We want experiences. We want road trips we haven't had before. We want to go play. I'm telling you, the Georgia-Notre Dame game at Notre Dame in 2017 changed everything. It really did, because now everybody's looking, hey, why can't we go to Notre Dame? Why can't we go to UCLA? Why can't we go to Penn State like Alabama's going? So that's number one. Number two, I am not going to pay you $125 to watch you play Western Carolina. I'm just not going to do it.
So I think that what Tony says there, at least, by and large, representing a kind of a broad swath of the college football world, I think is really true. I do think, for whatever reason, in these modern times, people are just busy. They seem to have a lot going on, and the stranglehold that sports once had over all of society, it's still obviously huge, but it may be not quite as big as it once was, that people do, whether it's their... Honestly, I don't know what people do. With their kids, they're going hunting, whatever else. Just somehow, some way, college sports being, or it's just sports in general being this thing that people feel like they have to do. In some cases, that's not always the case anymore. So the fact that Georgia's working really hard to say, we're going to make sure that our product, Georgia football, SEC football, college football, remains as top of mind, remains as paramount in people's minds as it always has. We're going to go out there and schedule the most aggressive type of scheduling we can get. I think that's a really cool brand for Georgia. And I think that what Tony points out there is true. Georgia did this first with Notre Dame and then started adding games against like Texas and Oklahoma and Ohio State and all the other big, programs that Georgia's added in recent years. And sure enough, lo and behold, a couple of, months later, here comes Alabama. They're doing some of the same kind of stuff, scheduling some of the same kind of teams. And on and on and on it has gone with these big non-conference schedulings to now even a school like Florida that has for a long time really held out on the idea that it wanted to have any of these kinds of big non-conference games, knowing they already play Florida State at the end of the year and they're content to kind of play directional FCS level programs in the month of September. They've long been a holdout on this kind of stuff. Even now, Florida is scheduling some of these kinds of games because that's clearly the direction the sport is moving. And as I said before, as someone who has the Georgia G on his shirt today and a Georgia fan, it does make me a little bit proud to know that Georgia is the one that has kind of ushered all of this in. And frankly, as a consumer of college football, not just Georgia games, but the rest of the sport there as well, I also think it's just better for college football overall that you've got these kind of Power 5 teams playing other Power 5 teams, and maybe in a year to come, that's all Georgia's going to be playing are Power 5 teams on their schedule. I think that's kind of a really good thing for the sport. But there's also this, and Tony brought this up yesterday too, that in the midst of doing this, even adding Louisville, who, yesterday Georgia announced, kind of a mid-level ACC team, not a big national brand the way that Oklahoma or Ohio State is, but even doing that, you are adding a Power 5 team to your schedule. That means in 2026, Georgia's got games against what? UCLA, still Georgia Tech, Power 5, at least for now. Louisville, Power 5 program. That's 3 non-conference Power 5 games. The following year, take UCLA off, put Florida State on. You've got 3 non-conference Power 5 opponents there. And as Tony Barnhart explains, echoing something that Kirby Smart has said before, all of this is about posturing for what might eventually be an expansion of the college football playoff. From SEC Country Live, Tony Barnhart once again.
But it's a balancing act. You also got to take care of your coach and don't ask him to play 12 tough games in a season. It's a balancing act, and there's one that we're going to continue to talk about. But the trend of good intersectional rivalry games, that is going to continue because I think, Brandon, we're going to have an 18 playoff here in about 4 or 5 years. And the coaches want to know, if I step out and play this schedule, can I get into the playoff with 2 losses? And the answer to that question had better be yes, or I'm not stepping out.
As I've told you before, I'm excited about the move towards better schedules, not just for Georgia but the rest of college football, but honesty also compels me to admit that if what Tony just describes there is true, and Kirby Smart has echoed almost that same sentiment going back a couple of years ago, if that's going to happen, it is going to require some sort of change in the current thinking of the College Football Playoff Selection Committee, because the idea of we're going to reward good teams for playing tough schedules, that's not really the way the committee operates now. You know, they like Power 5, well-known teams with a 0 or a 1 in the loss column more so than they like rewarding the teams that play the tougher schedules. If they were currently willing to do that, we would have seen more instances when 2 SEC teams would have gotten in the college football playoff. As it stands right now, we've only seen that happen just the one time in 2017. But even if I have some skepticism about how quickly the committee is going to adopt the mindset of good teams who play tough schedules ought to be rewarded, it's still good for the overall nature of the entertainment product, which is what this sport is all about. So good stuff yesterday from Tony Barnhart on SEC Country Live, and a fun new landscape for college football. Good teams playing better schedules, and I don't know, as a Dog fan, it makes me certainly very proud to think that UGA has been leading the way in all of that, the way that Tony Barnhart described there yesterday. Let me shift gears, talk about this here for a moment. Georgia got a kind of an interesting commitment yesterday from Brett Thorson, a punter who hails out of Australia. Now, this isn't all that unique to college football now, in that a lot of programs have kind of reached into the land down under, is that what we call Australia, to find a punter. But obviously, you know, this is kind of Georgia's first foray into all of this. Let me show you Thorson here on social media, who kind of celebrates his UGA commitment there, saying he's extremely honored. He kind of gives you the honored in the Australian spelling. So this is already our first kind of foray into this being a little bit different in the fact that he's got the U there in the word honored. That's kind of a cool thing to say. But he's honored to say that he's committing to play football at the University of Georgia, full scholarship for 2022. So Thorson certainly has the look of a very good punter here. I also like what Todd Hartley, the UGA assistant coach, tight ends coach, kind of gave his way of celebrating this. He says a cheers, go Dogs, and gives you a kangaroo there. There will be a lot of this kind of imagery related to Thorson when he steps on the field, if he eventually emerges as Georgia's punter, and it seems like he probably will be likely to do that. My prediction is, and there you can see some nice video of him there from an interview that he's doing with Jeff Sintel there too. My prediction is that Thorson will be a huge fan favorite just because of the kind of unique nature of all of this. When I was a kid, Georgia had a defensive end named Richard Tarditz who was from France, and he was a huge fan favorite too, just because I think they call him the Biarritz Blitz because he was from Biarritz, France. You know, they're just, when you have something like that that's so different than everything else, Georgia fans just have a way of kind of gravitating towards that. So Thorson, I'm sure he knows what he's getting into as he travels up to the Northern Hemisphere here and starts to play college football in the SEC, a very big deal in these parts, and I'm sure that he will become a big deal to UGA fans there as well. The accent and everything else that goes along with that, I am sure that Thorson will be very well represented, or I should say welcomed very well by UGA fans, and no doubt Georgia looking to capitalize on what so many other programs there has well. Very successful punters coming from Australia, kind of a cool trend. Georgia now a part of all of that. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by our friends at Merriweather & Tharp. And glad to have you with us no matter how you get to us today. Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch, all the video platforms, radio at noon on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref podcast, wherever you find them, including the world-famous DawgNation.com. Just really glad to have you with us today. And as I said before, big thanks to our friends at Merriweather & Tharp for making it all possible. You know, the divorce process can be scary and confusing. It can even be a little uncomfortable to talk about. But one of the reasons why I'm always eager to tell Meriwether and Tharp's story on this show is because I know what they do for people. In a challenging time, in, as I said before, what can be a scary situation, my friends at Meriwether and Tharp step up to the plate to be an advocate, an ally on your side. Sometimes that means educating you about the process, and sometimes that may mean fighting for you in a tough situation. Whatever it is, that's what Meriwether and Tharp is ready to do. They've been through these kinds of things thousands of times, and the institutional knowledge you gain by doing that, they want to put that to work for you. So they're going to take a lot of steps for you along the way in this process, but the first step belongs to you. Reach out for that initial consultation. Go to the website, theatlantadivorceteam.com. It's theatlantadivorceteam.com. Find out what so many folks in our audience have already discovered, that Meriwether and Tharp is your source for Georgia divorce. Find them online at theatlantadivorceteam.com. All right, we're going to get Terence Edwards coming up here in just a moment. Before that, let me go around the doghouse here today. And we had kind of a cool moment a little earlier this week when we got a chance to hear from Georgia defensive lineman Trayvon Walker, a guy who has absolutely been talked about in kind of big terms this year as someone who could help fill a role, at least from a easy for me to say, statistical standpoint, of what Azeez Ojulari did for UGA last season. Kirby Smart has kind of pegged Walker as maybe being one of the guys who may help fill that gap here this season. And for a defensive story for Georgia that includes, listen, breaking in new guys in the secondary, challenging for the lack of experience there, a lot being asked of that Georgia front seven here this season, defensive line, linebackers included. Trayvon Walker says that group is absolutely ready for the challenge they're awaiting here this upcoming season.
We just all have to step up and be the leaders that we know we can be and that we're being coached to be, and just lead the younger guys in the right direction to show them for later years to come for them to be leaders also.
So he wants to help those young guys. And as I said before, young guys in the secondary, one of the ways you can do that is to give opposing quarterbacks less time to throw. Getting after them from a pass rush standpoint, there's no doubt that in 2020, Georgia's probably better from a pass rush standpoint than it had been in any of the previous years under Kirby Smart. And Trayvon Walker says this Georgia defensive line wants to lead the way in making sure that continues here this season as well.
One thing that we've always been focused on, because we always looked at it as a run-stopping defensive line or a defense. Our pass rush really don't get noticed like that a lot of the times, and that's something that we're prided on right now and trying to get after.
The numbers back up what Walker's saying there. Georgia fewest rushing yards allowed in both 2019 and 2020, and that's a good thing, but also getting after the quarterback, that may be an even better thing when you look at the recipe towards winning a national championship, and Walker says the UGA is ready to do more in that regard here this season. And, of course, for him, kind of playing on the outside and the outside linebackers and all the dynamic athletes that Georgia has defensively, Walker also says that what they're going to be trying to get done this season is aided when you have a potential first-round pick like Jordan Davis as your nose guard, when you have a guy like Devontae Wyatt who had a chance to leave Georgia after this past season but chose to come back, when you have those big anchors in the interior of your defensive line, all of a sudden everything happening around both Wyatt and Davis, all of a sudden it gets a lot easier to accomplish.
Those two on the inside are a big help to us on the outside and the middle linebackers, because if it's closed on the inside, they have no other choice other than to bounce it in. That leaves the ends and the linebackers to make the play.
And then finally there's this from the recruiting class after Walker in 2020. Walker, of course, coming in from the class of 2019. A defensive lineman in that class that actually reminded folks a lot of Trayvon Walker was Jalen Carter, a guy who really flashed some brilliance at time in the 2020 season, but according to what Trayvon Walker said when he met with the media a little earlier this week, he believes that the best could still be yet to come for Jalen Carter. In fact, we may see some of that here during the 2021 season.
Jalen has been out there with me a lot. He's growing tremendously as a player, learning the scheme of the defense, just growing up, and you could tell that he's really learning how to play the game of football at a collegiate level.
Boy, I like the sound of that. Trayvon Walker, dazzling young prospect in his own right, saying, boy, wait till you see what also Jalen Carter has in store for this season. Really good stuff from the Georgia defensive lineman Trayvon Walker there this week. Let me also tell you about this real quick before we get ready to speak to Terence Edwards. At the UGA bookstore coming up G-Day weekend, what an incredible weekend it's going to be. You see there on your screen if you're watching on video, 2 big days of autograph signing. Starting on Friday, April 16th from 4 to 6 p.m., you got Tyson Campbell, Ben Cleveland, Mark Webb. They're going to be there signing autographs. Then you move move on to Saturday. That's the actual G-Day day. From 10 to noon there that day, you've got DeAndre Swift coming back. How about that? Along with future first-round pick Azeez Ojulari. And then from noon until 2, you've got the one of the all-time Georgia fan favorites, Richard LeCount, on hand. So 6 big autograph guests on G-Day weekend, both Friday and Saturday, April 16th, 17th. Once again, Tyson Campbell, Ben Cleveland, Mark Webb from 4 to 6 there on that Friday. And then Saturday, the day of G-Day on April 17th, DeAndre Swift back in town, Azeez Ojulari from 10 to noon, then Richard LeCount from noon until 2. Unbelievable weekend there for the UGA bookstore. Go to UGAbookstore.com to find out more about this. It's right across from the stadium, right next to the Tate Student Center. You can also give them a call to kind of reserve your spot, 706-542-3171. Let me give you the number once again, 706-542-3171. 3171. Reach out to them either at that number at UGAbookstore.com. Secure your spot in line for this great, great series of autographs going down the UGA bookstore on Friday and Saturday as we get ready for a G-Day on April 16th and 17th. Really good stuff. All right. Before we're done today, it's Dr. Brad Register from Athens Orthopedic Clinic. A chance to hear from him on the injury recovery for Jermaine Burton. Sounds like good news on that. George Pickens, we'll wait and see. Also a little bit on JT Daniels before we're done. Really good stuff from former UGA football player and now orthopedic surgeon Dr. Brad Register on that before we're done. But for everything else related to the wide receiver situation for Georgia, frustrating to be talking about an injury once again, but still maybe a positive outlook overall. Let's find out more about that. Our buddy Terence Edwards right here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Merriweather and Tharp.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
And here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Merriweather and Tharp, happy to have the former Georgia wide receiver Terence Edwards on the program. Terence, I love having you on the show. Your insight's always terrific. I have to be honest about one thing, though. I'm so tired of talking about these wide receiver injuries, Terence. Can we get some good news here at some point in time? Can we talk about what guys are doing on the field as opposed to what injury recovery is going to be like? To have to do this again, of course I'm joking here, but to have to do this again this week with Jermaine Burton, a week after we did this with George Pickens, even though the Burton situation seems more optimistic, for a lot of Georgia fans, Terence, they just had more of this they can stand, and I'm sure you understand that.
Jermaine, and my mind just went to the worst once I heard that he was carted off the field. So my mind went to the worst, and I was relieved. He texted me back. I texted him earlier that when I heard it, he texted me back like at 12 o'clock. These kids these days, I'm asleep. So I got it the next morning, and he said he was fine. So he said he was fine, and I talked to him later that day, and he just told me that, he's kind of hyperextended, and he was going to be fine. I asked him how he did. He was just trying to go up for a back shoulder fade and just came down wrong. So he's fine. We could up now to relax and breathe and just look forward to, getting healthy now and getting summer workouts going.
What we have talked about kind of a lot is that when you have a hyperextension situation, if you see it happen, right, it looks so terrible. And sometimes it ends up being bad, right? I mean, there are moments when it does. But it's one of those things that when you see it happen, you just immediately, as you said, you kind of immediately think the worst because it looks really bad. The knee's going one way, the body's going another way, and your mind immediately goes to just how, vulnerable that those, tendons around that knee are. But there are moments, and thankfully in the case of Burton, where it turns out to be that maybe it's not as bad as it looks. A guy gets taken off the practice field, carted off, as the description we've all been given. Your mind does go to these really dark places around all of that. But sometimes it ends up not being as bad as it initially sounds. And, boy, there's so many Georgia fans throwing up hallelujahs and saying thank you that this one has ended up maybe being one of those situations where the initial fears were probably overstated. For Georgia fans, that ends up being a really good thing.
I think so. We got bad news the week before, and now I think the second best receiver went down as well. So, we feared the worst, hope for the best, and I think we got the best outcome in this situation, that he's just going to be, out rehabbing now, just strengthening that knee, and he'll be ready sooner than later and get ready for summer workouts, and let's get ready to play against Clemson.
And I think that's all really good news. I'm going to talk to you more about that in a moment. But as a former player yourself, and unfortunately you dealt with this with your brother, the athletic careers, especially in college, right? You got 4 years to get all this done. And maybe, if you have a fifth year, and, we've kind of given guys extra year of eligibility because of the pandemic. But for most guys, it's like 4 years to get it done. And all you're praying for the entirety of that time is just let me be healthy. Let me make the most out of my college experience. Terence, would you mind kind of speaking about this from the perspective of a player for when you do have an injury concern, or in the case of George Pickens, who we talked about last week, when an injury actually does materialize, just what that means to the player who knows that he's only got a limited window of time to show what he's all about and make an impression on NFL scouts, or just as a competitive athlete, go out there and win and earn as much accolades as you can while you're in college. What's the mental mindset of a player when you have part of what it's already fairly short, a college career, taken away because of injury?
Right. It's in the back of your mind as an athlete. You go in every season, man. You prepare. Like these workouts right now, if you have never played football at this level, most fans will not understand what these players go through mentally, physically, to prepare themselves to be the best player that they could be. So that's why I'm hesitant to even criticize a player, because I know what mentally and physically how taxing it is to prepare for a season. But now you put all that work into it, then something like this happened. I know George was looking to have a great season this year. I think we were all looking for him to probably be the next player to join the 1,000-yard club, and now all of that is gone. He's probably going to be out for the rest of the season. So that your mindset is like, man, why me? I think with my brother, we kept questioning why him, and we never know what God has in store for us, and we don't know, but we're still human. We still question and wonder why now. So George right now and any other player that going through this, you just got to get your support system around. You got to get people around you that truly care about you and not the football player to just bring light to you. And you can see light at the end of the tunnel when you have people around you. That's why Robert came back to Athens to do his rehab.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And you said something a moment ago, and you kind of touched on this last week, and I love the way you said it about, hey, you were texting some of the guys saying, I'm ready for one of y'all to join me in this club. And we kind of joked about how right now the 1,000-yard receiver club at Georgia, you're a little lonely in that room. You need somebody to join you. And, obviously Jermaine Burton would be, I would think, in a lot of folks' mind, the next one on that list, after George Pickens, maybe because Pickens does have more experience, to kind of join, a 1,000-yard type season, be a part of that conversation. You obviously know Jermaine really well. You've worked with him. He's not the only guy for Georgia that can have big season. But what is about Burton in particular, in addition to the experience that he gained last year, that does kind of put him maybe at the doorstep of a breakout season here this year?
He has all the traits that you're looking for. I mean, we have spoke about Jermaine and his abilities, man, my gosh, for a long time, and he showed it last year. Yes, he had some freshman wall that he hit, some things that he know that he could do better. I think this spring was really big for him, the limited number of reps that he's taken so far. But he's gonna need to take that second step in his second season to be the explosive playmaker that we all believe that he could be. And I truly believe he has the ability to get 1,000 yards. If he gets the opportunities that he needs, he will be in that group if he gets the opportunity. And our offense evolved to that downfield, being able to throw for 400 yards like we did twice last season. He will be in that category to possibly be in the 1,000-yard club. And that would be nice for a trooper of mine to be the next one on the street with me.
That would be a really cool thing. That's exactly right. Of course, when Jermaine Burton initially announced his first college commitment, he did so on your birthday. So to have that guy kind of following in your footsteps there as a 1,000-yard receiver, George, I think for a lot of Georgia fans, they would love the symmetry related to all of that. Let me also ask you this. A moment ago you mentioned that, okay, so now he can kind of turn his attention to just kind of the work that he's going to be doing throughout the summer to get ready for the upcoming season, both from a, kind of re-strengthening that, that knee, and just also just continuing the work of getting ready to play this upcoming fall. What does the summer look like for a guy like Jermaine Burton? If he doesn't practice again the rest of the spring, what do those preceding weeks after that kind of look like?
Now just rehabbing right now, trying to get that knee into the best shape possible. During the summer, he'll just be working out, continue to get his body stronger, continue to get faster, and just continue to work on his craft. I'm sure he will come home this summer, and we will get some sessions in on the field, just continue to just trying to make him as the best receiver he could be. I mean, there may be some things he he normally call me and ask me or tell me we need to work on this, or we'll get on the field and we'll go work on it. So I'm sure there's some things in his game that he would like to continue to develop, and once he comes on, we would get on the field and try to develop those weaknesses that he feels he has in his game to be that next guy to join me in the 1,000-yard club. That's the type player he is. He's never satisfied. He's always looking to get better.
So I'm not really very well educated on the subject I'm about to ask you about, but it has come up with a lot of fans here. You know, when you see multiple receivers who deal with knee injuries, a lot of fans wonder, is there some sort of preventative measure that can be taken? Obviously, we know how to strengthen muscles, and we know how to, increase endurance, things like that. We know how to improve that level of athletic performance. But it seems like when it comes to, tendon strength and things of that regard, some of us maybe not quite aware of what can be done. Is there anything that can be done from a preventative standpoint that you're aware of that can make, guys like Burton or Pickens or Dominic Blaylock or anybody else you want to mention here, make them less susceptible to knee injuries, or is this simply a function of bad luck?
I think it's bad luck. I think the body, I'm not a doctor, but just my belief that the body is not made for all this force that we put on it. These guys are strengthening every tendon, ligament that they have in their body, so these things are prevented, but you really can't prevent them. I think it's a case of if your knee turns in a direction it does not belong, things are going to snap. Doesn't matter how much weight we lift. It doesn't matter if you put your body in an extremist situation, bad things are going to happen. I just pray for, I never had those things happen to me. I watched my brother go through this. Both of my brothers actually had ACL surgery. Right? So it's just one of those things that when you're in an awkward position, your knee's going to snap.
Well, Terence, I certainly appreciate your time here on our show today, and I do want to remind folks that when it comes to, working with those pass catchers, that's something you do on a regular basis, not just the guys that we see on TV on Saturdays, but all kinds of guys at the high school level and folks working their way to the high school level there as well. Your training academy sort of stretches out the entire gamut when it comes to football. So for folks who want to find out more about that, how can they find out you? Or last week you gave a shout-out for your brother's company. Anybody else's training company you want to give a shout-out for today, you're obviously free to do that as well.
Yes, so I told my brother every week I would give him a shout-out. So any running backs out there as well looking to get trained by a running back that was a first-round pick, Georgia legend, and he understands the game as well as I do. Robert Edwards on all social media, and myself, if anyone's looking to get their son taught in a proper way, in a way that he's going to understand the position in and out. You can find me on all social medias at Terence Edwards Wide Receiver Academy.
Terence, I really appreciate your time. Thanks so much. I know we got a lot of stuff we'll be doing as we head towards G-Day here, so looking forward to doing all that with you. Thanks for being here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Merriweather and Tharp, and I'll look forward to talking to you again very soon.
Okay, thank you, BA, for having me.
Good stuff there.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
And don't forget, just a couple minutes, we'll be lucky to be joined by Dr. Brad Register, former UGA player in his own right, and Athens orthopedic surgeon. Talk about the Burton situation, George Pickens, and everything else. Really good stuff. True medical expertise coming up here in just a couple of minutes' time. Let me also say this. This is not SEC related as the SEC Through music cranks up, but we do have some breaking news here. Legendary college basketball coach Roy Williams retiring as head coach at North Carolina, of course, former Kansas coach there as well, former UNC player, 33 seasons. He is stepping back and retiring here. So Roy Williams stepping down from North Carolina, one of the well-known names in the sport, kind of stepping back. College basketball, a little bit like some of the stuff we've seen in college football, in that, we've seen kind of an exodus of assistant coaches to the NFL. In college basketball, boy, you saw John Beilein a couple years ago, and Indiana have a hard time kind of finding a head coach as a replacement for Miller there. The job of finding big-time college basketball coaches seems to be getting a little bit more difficult for maybe a number of reasons, and I certainly won't pretend to know why Roy Williams is stepping down from North Carolina, but interesting to see one of the big legends of the sport kind of stepping down here. So Roy Williams gone from UNC, one of the recognizable faces from the ACC, will not be patrolling the sidelines next year. Before we do our SEC Through here, and I want to tell you something funny that a former Florida defensive back have said, let me also give you a quick shout out to my friends at Engineered Solutions of Georgia. Waterproofing, foundation issues, two of the big things that homeowners might deal with from time to time. Well, ESOG, also proud partners of UGA, good friends of ours here on DawgNation Daily. They've got 2 full-time engineers on staff dedicated to make sure they're there to serve you and take care of you with all of your foundation waterproofing issues. Really easy to get in touch with. Simply give them a call, 678-ESOG now. That's 678-ESOG now, that for Engineered Solutions of Georgia. So yesterday, ESPN.com does a huge story on former Florida defensive back Marco Wilson around the event of Florida's Pro Day. Wilson, of course, famous for the thrown shoe that has been now immortalized forever with our golden shoe right here on the desk. Wilson was the one that threw the shoe that led to the loss against LSU. Now, you might expect a little bit of contrition here. Man, I hate that I cost my team a game. That's not exactly what you got from Marco Wilson. I found this to be a very odd quote. Good job by Michael Carvel for pulling this up. He says, that's actually, in that type of energy, what did people expect? Like I was going to hand it back to him nicely. I was super excited and I threw it. I didn't purposely do it. It was just a reaction. It went pretty far. I mean, I didn't think it would go that far, but it did. That's Marco Wilson saying, hey, in that type of energy, what did people expect? I think the answer to that question is fairly simple. They expected you not to throw a shoe and get a 15-yard penalty and, cost your team there the game. And in the event that you did do that, maybe a little bit of an apology would not be the worst thing. This is a very, very typical thing. A lot of Florida players kind of free to talk, say what they want to say, and sometimes it doesn't always paint the Gators program in the most positive light. Huge expose of, not expose, probably profile is a better word here. Huge profile of Wilson at ESPN.com yesterday, but I don't know that it did the Florida program any favors, and I don't know that it did Marco Wilson any personal favors there either, but interesting stuff with that. Another interesting SEC through type story to get to, not directly related to the SEC, but eventually it could be. So the NCAA was in front of the U.S. Supreme Court yesterday, kind of arguing a case that started with a former West Virginia player, basically, kind of suing the NCAA over issues related to antitrust and amateurism and everything like that. And a lot of the justices, kind of from sort of both sides of the spectrum, ideological spectrum, were kind of really grilling the NCAA pretty hard yesterday on kind of, how it views its status as, kind of protectors of amateurism and things like that, and the idea that to a lot of folks, the athletes who play these sports don't get paid, and some people think that they should. And the argument the NCAA seems intent on making, and you read a lot about this, ESPN.com, other places, the argument the NCAA seems intent on making is that if the status of the amateur athletes changes, then it's going to be hard for the NCAA to continue to exist because fans won't like it as much if it becomes another version of professional sports and not college sports. This is the kind of thing that causes some people to roll their eyes. But as I've brought up a few times lately when these kinds of issues have come up, I take this argument very, very seriously. And frankly, there's a lot about the NCAA I don't like, and there are certain aspects of the NCAA that I don't trust. But this particular argument I do take really seriously, and I would suggest that you ought to take it seriously too. The reason why I think you ought to take it seriously is the NCAA says, listen, if this just becomes like a minor league version of professional sports, people won't like it. The reason why I think you should take that seriously is look around the rest of the world of sports. What other minor league version of sports has any level of televised popularity whatsoever? It doesn't exist at the football level, XFL and the other spring league that exists a couple years before that. They can't even get off the ground. No one wants to watch. Minor league baseball, last year there wasn't minor league baseball. As a, sport in general, minor league baseball is contracting. It's getting smaller. There will be fewer teams. For as much as, rookies in Major League Baseball like Ronald Acuna Jr. for the Braves a couple of years ago are big business, when those same players were playing minor league baseball, they do no business at all. Acuna was in Rome. Anyone could have gone to see him, but really for the most part, no one does. Young, pre-professional athletes are just not big business in that same way. No one watches the G League in the NBA. When guys skip college to go to Europe, no one really follows their career, at least in mass numbers, when they go over there to do that. The Korn Ferry Tour, the kind of precursor to the PGA Tour, not only can you not watch that on television, you can't even watch that on streaming videos. Coverage of the events simply doesn't exist because there's no appetite for it among the public, apparently. So when the NCAA says, hey, if we become just a minor league sport, we'll lose our popularity, I think somehow, some way, there's a chance that we ought to consider that might be true. I mean, watch the NCAA basketball tournament right now. some of these games are, frankly, not all that pleasing to watch. They're not all things of beauty. Yet, for the most part, even with ratings down this year, people still tune in large numbers to watch this because somehow, I know this sounds corny and cliche, but the name on the front of the jersey, the school this teams that these players are playing for, seems to mean something, even if the names on the back of the jersey and at the basketball level get more obscure year after year after year. So this is a story worth following. The opinion of many folks in the media seems to be going aggressively in one direction, but I'm not quite so sure that folks shouldn't consider the other side of this debate as well. What the NCAA argued in front of the Supreme Court yesterday, to me, that is an argument at least worth considering, and we'll make that your SEC through. We got to do, let's talk to Dr. Brad Register right now. And boy, it's a great pleasure here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Merriweather and Tharp. We get a chance to speak to someone that can kind of fill us in on what
injury, which I know this is a different sport, but Bryce Harper, the enemy of the Braves, had that really gruesome hyperextension injury running through first base a couple years ago, and I would have sworn that he tore his ACL or his PCL or something, and it turns out that the reports were that he just had a bone bruise, and I forget how long he was out. It was 6 or 8 weeks, something like that. But you were right. It's a violent appearing injury. I mean, the knee goes backwards in a direction that it shouldn't go. The body lurches forward, and it's really violent looking. And more often than not, when you see an injury like that, there will be some sort of structural damage. So it sounds like it was somewhat similar type of injury that Burton sustained. So I definitely think that he and Georgia in general got lucky with that one. If there's truly no structural damage.
So not quite as lucky when it came to George Pickens last week with the injury that he's dealing with now. You hear all kinds of things when it comes to the ACL stuff. You hear, comparisons to players who've made these like superhuman aggressive comebacks. And, obviously in some cases players, sometimes it takes a little longer or sometimes they have a little bit of a setback along the way. With Burton, I wanted to ask you about best case scenario, but with Pickens, it seems more fair to say realistic scenario. What is the outlook for his recovery right now? What is he kind of looking at in terms of his road back to football?
Well, first of all, I guess the question is going to be when does he have his surgery? And as far as I know, he's not had his surgery yet. I haven't heard any reports about that. But so I guess the clock starts ticking once he finally does have his surgery. But, we talked briefly before how in this day and age, and we've got much better technology when we reconstruct ACLs than we did, 20, 30 years ago. But in this day and age, it's typically a 7 to 9 month recovery process. I briefly mentioned there was a push 25 years ago to get people back in 3 or 4 months, and it was called accelerated rehab. In the 90s they were doing it. Actually, a thought came to my head. The most famous example is Jerry Rice back in 97. He tore his ACL, I think it was the first game, and he came back later. It was in August 31st, September 1st, something like that. He came back in the middle of December. It was a big Monday night game, and he got hurt. He came back and played and actually scored a touchdown. But when he when he scored the touchdown, he broke his patella. He broke his kneecap when he landed on it, just because he didn't re-tear the ACL. But it just shows that rushing people back in 3 or 4 months is not a good idea. So you're talking about realistic. The most recent example, which I think you mentioned the other day, was Amari Rodgers coming back in 5.5 months. I mean, that's pretty unlikely. I would be very surprised if someone's coming back in 5.5, 6 months. It just takes a long time for the knee to feel normal again. I mean, a realistic time might be 6 to 7 months, I'd probably say, which if he had his surgery soon would put you, I guess with the math, it was that late October, early November, something like that. And I guess the other question is whether or not he decides to come back and play, or whether or not he just decides to opt out, so to speak, and train for the NFL draft or something like that. But I think, if he wants to come back, he should be back by 7 to 8 months. I'd be a little bit surprised if he didn't. The most important news that I believe Coach Smart said publicly is that there was no other structural damage besides the ACL. And if that's true, that really makes all the difference. It's the difference between someone who tore the meniscus on both sides, or tore the MCL, or a partial PCL tear, or a cartilage defect. Those types of things cause more swelling afterwards, and you have to protect the knee more. And if it's truly an isolated ACL, then I think he should be able to come back in 7 to 8 months.
So on this show, we try to, give credence to a couple of different ideas at the same time. Obviously, selfishly, I and many of the folks who are watching and listening right now would want George to play again for Georgia. He's such a potential big part of a championship formula. But at the same time, he's got, professional ambitions as well. His football career is going to extend along beyond 2021. Is he putting himself at an additional risk if he were to come back and play, as you said, maybe realistically in November, biggest games of the year, then come December, January, by playing in those games? How much of an additional risk is he taking on, knowing that this is a guy who could be a very high NFL draft pick in the future?
So that's a good question, and my answer to your question would be yes and no. There is a slight additional risk, and there have been studies that have shown that if someone has ACL reconstruction, the most common time to re-tear that ACL is between 9 and 12 months after the surgery. So essentially that's just saying that when you first come back, you're a little more likely to re-tear it than you are a little further down the road as you gain strength. And so I think, but not everyone's going to be getting the same rehab that George Pickens is. So one thing that Ron Corson, the athletic trainer, and his staff are very good at, and they've done for years, is just training these players and doing ACL prevention programs. But he'll come out of this stronger than he was before. I know he was in great shape before, but his hips, his knees, they'll be stronger than they were before. And Ron and the medical staff at UGA would never clear him to play unless he passes very specific sports testing. And what I mean by that is we have all these different drills that we'll put athletes through, whether they're doing cone drills, they're cutting, they're doing single leg squats, they're doing jumps. They get on a machine that measures the strength and endurance from the quadriceps and hamstrings from one leg to the other. There's something called like a power plate type thing where they can jump on it. We can measure explosiveness. So basically, he has to meet certain categories, meet certain landmarks, or he won't be cleared to play at all. So once he's met those necessary requirements to be able to return, I don't think he'd be putting himself at a huge extra risk. Now, I mentioned the highest risk, most common time to re-tear your ACL is between 9 and 12 months, but going through the type of rehab program he's going to go through, I mean, that's kind of for all comers. That study was looking at all type of athletes, including high school athletes, who maybe did therapy once or twice a week the whole time, versus a guy who's doing it twice a day for 7 or 8 months. So I would say statistically maybe he's a slightly higher risk, but realistically he's probably not. And I would actually argue that a guy like him may be able to help himself more go to the NFL draft by showing how healthy it is and what he can do in a field before somebody has to draft him.
I think that's a really interesting point. I'm glad you shared that. One more knee situation I want to address with you here for a moment, and this is a guy who's now a good bit farther away and farther along in his recovery. That's JT Daniels at quarterback, who it just stands to reason now much healthier, you would think, for 2021 than a lot of what he dealt with in 2020, something that actually kept him off the football field for a long time. You know, how much healthier do you expect Daniels to be this season? And that increased mobility that comes, maybe it's increased confidence as well. How much better as a football player do you think that has a chance to make him, knowing that he's now another year removed from the initial surgical procedure here?
I believe it has the potential to make a huge difference for him. I mean, I've not been involved with his medical care at all, but I watched him walk around at the Georgia-Florida game last year, and it looked like he had a little bit of a limp, and it looked like a guy who had trouble extending his knee all the way out. So, now that he's had another surgery to clean out his knee, the reports that I hear are that he's doing very well with that, and his knee feels good. So if you have confidence in your knee, then it just changes everything as a quarterback. He's going to be able to step into his throws a little better. He's going to be able to plant and change direction when he's under pressure better. So I think that it could make a huge difference for him, and I'm sure that the coaches are, after an injury like that, it definitely is going to mess with your mechanics, with your footwork. I know the coaches have wanted to work on that, and I think there are limitations on how much you can work on that if a guy doesn't trust his knee. So potentially it could be huge for him to have more confidence and more mobility in that knee this year.
Let me squeeze in one more thing before I let you go, and you've been very generous with your time. Mentioned before that you yourself, former Georgia letterman, you leave UGA, you go to medical school, I believe, at Johns Hopkins. Tell me the story, if you don't mind, quickly here about how a UGA football player ends up doctor, now back working in Athens as an orthopedic surgeon. How does all of that go down, and how much of that did you already know you wanted for you to be your career path while you were playing at UGA?
That's a good question. I had an idea I wanted to go into medicine. My grandfather, my mother's side, is a doctor, and his father was a doctor down in Florida, so it always kind of interests me, but I wasn't 100% sure about that. But I had several minor injuries as a kid, both in high school and in college, and I initially was thinking about going to physical therapy. I worked with several physical therapists, and you spend so much time with them during a rehab process that you really get to know them well and appreciate what they do. But ultimately, during college, I did decide I wanted to go into medicine, and really tried to spend as much time with the team medical staff. Ron Elliott was the team medical doctor at the time, and Nixon Robinson and Butch Mulherin were the orthopedic surgeons that were at Athens Orthopedic Clinic, where I am now. And I just tried to pick their brain, and I would hang around them sometimes when I could and just get an idea of what they were doing. But it was definitely a lot of work. I mean, anyone who's played a college sport can tell you that there are many demands on your time, and if you want to maintain good grades while you're doing that, you just don't have free time in the fall. I mean, period. I would have a little bit of free time in the spring, especially when we were just working out and not doing practice, but there was just no time to waste. But you kind of get in that mindset of just, you're doing practice, you're going to school and you're studying, and other than the weekends, and once you get that way, I mean, it worked out for me. But I just kind of decided early on it was something I was interested in doing, and I've been very blessed to be able to make it this far.
Well, I would imagine as a former athlete, now physician, when you're sitting across, in a meeting with another athlete who has, his own or her own health, kind of in mind after an injury, I'm sure you must have sort of a special feeling about what that must be like, because as a former athlete, you understand how important athletics is to so many of the athletes that you're treating now.
I think that does help for sure. I mean, it can be. Mentally, it's very difficult when when something gets taken away from you, something that maybe you took for granted that you can play a sport, and all of a sudden you can't. So, I certainly can empathize with those athletes when they injure. And I've never had ACL, but it tore both my MCLs like many offensive linemen do, and you've had multiple other procedures done over the years. So I try to express empathy, and I think it does help being on this end, having actually been through that type of experience.
Dr. Brad Register, Athens Orthopedic Clinic, former UGA player there as well. Tremendous insight into what Jermaine Burton's going through at the moment, what George Pickens is going to be facing here over the course of the next few months. Obviously, a little bit on JT Daniels there as well. Dr. Register, thank you so much for your time here on this show today. It is a great pleasure to get a chance to speak with you. And certainly we'll look forward to hopefully getting a chance to talk under happier terms here, but more about the Georgia Bulldogs on the field, less about injuries here in the months to come, we hope anyway.
Well, that sounds great. Thank you very much for having me. I enjoyed it.
All right, good. Let's go ahead and fire that fight song up as we wrap up here today. Good stuff there from Dr. Brad Register. Very, very interesting. For those of you on video, apologize for the audio issue there at the beginning of that. I'll also tell you this. We talked earlier about the NCAA arguing in front of the Supreme Court yesterday. Read AJC.com. Really interesting look at the name, image, likeness bill that has now passed in the state of Georgia. Some specific details worth your attention. Money earned, at least according to this legislation, would have to be put in an escrow account and then obtained by the athlete after graduation or leaving school. But right now, a lot of states kind of seeking their own name, image, likeness type stuff. Georgia now the latest in that discussion. AJC.com has a lot more on that. Also, on a lighter note here, and maybe now that the Jermaine Burton thing, as you heard Brad Register speaking about before, not as serious, we can kind of laugh about this. John Paul Williams sharing this from our buddy Michael Morrow, known as Mad Dog on Twitter. Maybe why Georgia's had some knee injuries. If you look there, you may see a disguised Dan Mullen at Georgia practice. Pretty funny stuff. I appreciate John Paul Williams sharing that. I appreciate all of you being here. In fact, speaking of those lousy, stinking Gators, how about Gator Hater Countdown? 212 days from right now. Georgia goes back to Jacksonville, gets another win of those lousy, stinking Gators. We'll see you tomorrow at DawgNation Daily, presented by Merriweather and Tharp. And on video. Time now for our R.S. Andrews cool down. We'll take some of your comments here. Show went a little long today, so we won't have quite as much time for that. But for those of you who are hanging out with us, we'll certainly do some of that with you here today. And, of course, good to have you, Facebook, YouTube, and everything else. Zanya Gar, good to see you in the comment section. Tennille Calvino, good to see you there as well. As comments kind of roll in here. And, yeah, I apologize. A little bit of an issue there earlier. So I apologize for that. But good to have your comments all the way around nonetheless, as they continue to kind of roll in here. And we will continue to take some of those. Our friends even Merriweather and Tharp, as they sometimes do, stopping by to see us here on Facebook. That's always a nice thing to be able to see. So I certainly appreciate all of that and hope all of you are doing really well here. Hugh Nash wondering how he can prevent his own injuries. Pretty funny stuff from Hugh there. Pretty good stuff. Scotty Gorp wondering, are we still talking about fishing? The Auburn team obviously had a little trouble with that earlier this week. That's kind of a funny thing to think about. Mark Goodman checking in to give you Go Dogs here. So a lot of folks kind of rolling in here. Jacob O'Neill also reminding you it's opening day today for the Atlanta Braves, and that's a fun thing. Also, Braves make a big announcement just a few minutes ago that starting in the month of June, they're actually going to move, not June, starting sooner than that, they're going to move to 50% capacity for ticket sales. So all of a sudden, if you're looking to see sports kind of getting back to normal here a little bit, an opportunity to do that here with Major League Baseball leading the way for what college football might eventually do. Braves games at 50% capacity. That is, I would say, really good news all the way around there. So fun to think about that. Folks getting a chance to be inside Truist Park to watch some Braves games here this spring, heading towards the summer, and obviously what that could even mean even more so as the vaccine continues to roll out and folks continue to take good care of themselves from a health and safety standpoint. We could really be on the verge of turning the corner after one of the darkest chapters in certainly, recent history with all we've dealt with this pandemic. Maybe through the ingenuity of science and the folks who kind of sort of grouped together here and the continued persistence of us all, that we may really be on the verge of getting back to normal. What a fun thing to think about there. Let's hear a little bit more just for a moment. Frank Patterson wondering about MJ Sherman here a bit. Yeah, Georgia, I don't have anything specific to give you on Sherman, to be completely honest with you, but one of a host of Georgia linebackers who have dealt with injuries here this spring. A lot of those guys dealing with that kind of shoulder situation there. Mike D says, I cut the audio and I'm going to leave early. He says, I'm not treating the folks as well as I possibly could have. We'll certainly try to stick around for as many comments as we can. And generally speaking, when I say we're leaving early, we end up not actually doing that so much. DogFan3 says, not so fast. Cases are starting to rise again in some cities, and that's certainly the case in some respects. But I think the overall tone here is more positive than negative. But obviously you should stay well abreast of all the facts wherever you happen to be, for sure. West Georgia fan, Dog Fan says, will there be a Cover 4 Live today? Yes, there will be. DawgNation video channel tonight at 7:30 p.m. He says, we already discussed the strength and conditioning program at UGA. Do we need to modify anything due to all the injuries? We talked to Terence Edwards about that a little earlier, and others have kind of weighed on that there as well. I just don't believe that there's anything you can do to fully mitigate against bad luck. And this is something I've talked about over the years. I mocked Alabama fans when they thought there was something going on with their linebackers. They had a ton of linebackers that dealt with injuries for a while. I mocked the media at Auburn a couple of years before that when they were getting after Gus Malzahn for a cluster of injuries within their defensive secondary. That people have a tendency to want to make things that seem similar connected. Sometimes it's just not the case. So I understand where the question comes from, and maybe it will come up tonight. But I'm going to have a hard time. You're going to have to really show me some hard and fast evidence to suggest that there's anything that you can do to prevent these kinds of knee injuries. Sometimes you're just going to have a couple of them within the same position group. That's just kind of a thing that goes on there. But it's certainly a fair topic to get into. Mike D says, when's the bookstore day? So we talked about before, UGA bookstore, April 16th, April 17th, 6 autograph guests, all big names over the course of those 2 days. Ton of fun. We're also hoping to be back there for our DawgNation post-game show after G-Day as well. So a lot of that coming up. Memphis Dog said he was afraid I had a larynx injury a little earlier, shades of Ricky Steamboat WrestleMania 3. But no, I did not have a larynx injury. Glad we're past that. My throat's still in good condition here. SEC Dog says, is there any chance the UGA Clemson game could be moved if North Carolina remains closed? So even North Carolina, this is one of those things that's kind of been on the internet a little bit for the last few days, but I really don't think there's any good source for where it started with. I mean, this was sort of started, by the, internet rumor type thing. It started as an internet rumor, and it's kind of never really been much more than that. I mean, North Carolina is not quite as closed as it once was. North Carolina actually was ahead of, Georgia in terms of opening up sports for 50% capacity. North Carolina did that, I believe, last week. So if you've already got, 50% capacity for sports in North Carolina prior to now, then you've got a very clear path to be there by the time you get to, the fall when this game is going to be played. So there has definitely been some internet chatter about maybe the game could be moved from Charlotte, but that hasn't come from any kind of like official source or anything like that. A lot of it stemming from the fact that North Carolina has been a little bit more kind of, locked down, buttoned up about some of its COVID stuff than maybe some of its border states have been, neighbor states have been. But that's less true than it used to be. There's 50% capacity for North Carolina sporting events right now. And so you have very good chance of getting full capacity there by the fall. So I don't think there's any true substance to the idea that UGA Clemson could be played somewhere else other than North Carolina. But obviously I've seen chatter about that on the internet. Jay Shipe says, I'm trying to these 3 days to only have positive comments to complete my chakra healings. It's so hard. Well, I appreciate you doing your part there, trying your best anyway. Let's see. DogFan3 saw Godzilla versus King Kong. Yeah, I want to see that. And, I do have like the HBO Max thing, but I want to see this, I think, in a theater. I think I want to see this in a theater. I think it's time to get back to a movie theater for me. I have not been. Now, to be completely honest with you, I didn't go to movie theaters a ton back when they still were open. I'm one of these guys that I get very distracted very, very easily. So if I got somebody sitting behind me, like chomping on popcorn, something like that, it's hard for me to pay attention. I just get really fixated on that. Somebody's like playing with a candy wrap or something like that. I just can't stand it. I think it's called hypervigilance, maybe. I think I have a bad case of hypervigilance where I just sort of notice everything that's going on around me. So movie theaters can be a little intense for me sometimes, especially now that you have people eating actual meals in there, chomping on food. I can't stand that. Can't stand that. So for the most part, I wasn't going to theaters very much. but I kind of miss being in a movie theater. I love movie popcorn. One of my favorite things, like that $9 movie popcorn is just like one of the great treats for me. And I'll never understand why I like it so much because it's so expensive. Per capita, it's like the most expensive food you ever eat, pound for pound. But I love it. Love it. Big soda. I'm all about all of that kind of stuff. So the point here is that, I think I may be back in a movie theater again soon. This Godzilla versus King Kong seems to be a movie worth seeing in the theater. And for my money, I'm rooting for King Kong. I don't know who you guys are rooting for, but I'm rooting for King Kong there. Foster Moss says, I'm ready to get back to Jacksonville and drain the swamp. I love the idea of that, Foster. Thanks for weighing in here. DMart42 talking about some of the draft stuff here. Yeah, I think we may do this on the show tomorrow. The rumors out there of the Falcons' interest in Kyle Pitts. Not everybody who watches our show is a Falcons fan. We have folks who live all over the place, and so their favorite NFL team may be somebody else. But a huge portion of our audience, that follows the NFL do cheer for the Falcons in addition to Georgia because of the in-state tie there. Tough situation for Georgia fans who are also Falcons fans to start rooting for Kyle Pitts. I think it can be a little easier because, Pitts seems to be certainly a very good player, but I don't know. All things being equal, I guess I'd rather them not draft a Gator. Lucy Bowers-Boykin says the movie popcorn has to have the extra butter or whatever it is they call butter. Yeah, I agree with you on that. I like that very much the same way. I've also kind of discovered this thing at home where if you take microwave popcorn and you melt your own butter and then pour your own butter on top of the microwave popcorn, it tastes a little bit more like movie theater popcorn, so I'm kind of down with that. Travis McCullough also talking about the King Kong versus Godzilla. Scotty Gorb says, what's the scoop on Blaylock, BA? Not much said lately. My understanding is that his recovery is going really well. I mean, he's going to have access to all kinds of good medical care and things like that, and I know he's been through a lot. Mentally, you certainly expect him to approach it with the kind of gusto you need for him to. But overall, I mean, my expectation is, and certainly, I mean, I haven't heard anything bad. I'll put it that way. What I have heard seems to be good. Jerry Swafford had a good time with Jeff Sintel last night on Before the Hedges. I'm glad to hear that. Joy Waddell says, how about a shout-out to the Diamond Dogs? Yeah, big night for the Diamond Dogs the other night, getting a shutout against Clemson. That's always fun to see as a midweek game, and Diamond Dogs looking to get back at it. One of the interesting developments in the SEC thus far this season, Tennessee took 2 of 3 from Georgia to start SEC play a couple of weeks ago. Right now, this Vols team looks to be a much better Tennessee team than we're used to seeing them be. Not always a baseball power, but I think they're ranked in the top 10 in at least one of the polls. So all of a sudden now, what was already as deep an SEC as we've seen, maybe Tennessee even better than expected. Georgia on the road last week into Texas A&M. So kind of getting going here in SEC play and maybe using some momentum from a big midweek win to do so. Scotty Gorp, going back to the Blaylock, says maybe no news is good news on that. You may be right about that. Epic Robinson says, what's your opinion on the fishing scandal with Auburn? I would say there's only one school in the SEC likely to turn, bass fishing into a sport where you can cheat, and that's Auburn. So, yeah, I'm not surprised at that at all. That in no way is surprising to me. No way is that surprising. Jimmy Durham says Auburn baseball also winless in SEC play. That's pretty funny. I didn't realize that. I mean, the other big story in the SEC is between Kumar Rucker and Al Leiter's son. I mean, everybody's playing for second behind this Vanderbilt team with these pitchers. I mean, Leiter, I think he's pitched what? Has he pitched 16 no-hit innings? Am I right about this for some of you that follow this closely? Pitched no-hitter in his debut and came back and got 7 no-hit innings in his second game. Looking to go again this weekend. And, a lot of people say that Rucker may even be the better of the 2 pitchers. So, yeah, the first 2 starters for Vanderbilt are tough to beat right now. Last few years, I've kind of gotten more into college baseball. I really enjoy the sport. I probably went through a period of time where I didn't watch it as much as maybe I, could have. But this is one of the great things about the SEC network. There are a lot of things we complain about modern sports, and maybe with good reason. Some things, though, are better, and one of the things that is better is just our access. If you want to follow these other sports, you really have every opportunity to do that now. Baseball, a perfect example of that. The SEC network really increasing the availability of coverage. It's a cool thing to be able to see, and I have really enjoyed it the last couple of years. That guy says hot dogs taste better at ball games. Yeah, they do. Popcorn tastes better in a movie theater. Hot dogs taste better at ball games. I think you're right all the way around on that. Let's see what else. G. Grace Bama Boy says that Atlanta needs a new offensive lineman and running back. At a certain point in time, though, Atlanta has invested huge, big dollars into Jake Matthews, 2 first-round picks on the right side of the line a couple of years ago with Lindstrom and McCary. At a certain point in time, don't you have to say, this is our line, this is who we're going to go with here? I know they're obviously replacing Alex Mack at center, but at a certain point, man, you got to say, we've invested all we can. Now we got to trust these guys to play. Memphis Dog says Falcons need better management more than anything, and obviously that's what they're hopeful they get with the new regime in place. Rodney Hewitt says, I expect big things from Blaylock. Big year and a half removed from an injury, so I don't think it'll be as big of an issue for him as it will be for Marcus Rosemy-Jack. St. Rodney, I hope you're right about that, and you very well might be. Let's see what else. Burt Hayes hoping for the audio on Brad Registry. Yeah, we'll make sure we have that up on podcast for sure. And sorry about the issue on that. Dina Pruitt says, writing congratulatory cards to incoming UGA students, class of 2025. How the hell did I get so old? Dina, well, there's a lot of times I wanted to do some of the same kind of stuff. It always hits me, Dina, when we're talking about recruiting. And, 2022, 2023, these sound like years that ought to be outer space, right? You think about, living on the moon or something like that. These years just sound so futuristic, but that's like the recruiting cycles we're in right now. It's always just boggles my mind to think, these are the years that we're living in, but that's the way we all are. Dina, kind of a cool thing to be writing those letters. Appreciate you doing that. Jordan Bowman says, where does Clemson place in your personal ranking of UGA rivalries? Not as high as it once did. I would love for it to, I've said this in the show many times, I'd love for it to be back where it was before. I grew up as a kid where that rivalry was a very big deal. I remember there was a moment, for instance, in like 1990. This is kind of around the time in which you're kind of getting out of the Georgia-Clemson playing every single year type thing. You're moving away from that. But my memory is, this is pre-internet, so the way that things went viral back then was very different than it does now. But Clemson's media guide, and a media guide used to be a big deal. Media guides aren't really a big deal anymore. But Clemson's media guide, my memory was in 1990. Some of you may have better memories of this than I do, but was a Clemson player stepping on a Georgia player. That was the photo on their media guide. That was really controversial. Very controversial. So even as you're kind of getting out of the 80s in which these two programs had deep hatred for each other, even in a year like 90, that was kind of a big deal. One of the big wins at Sanford Stadium in 91 was against a top 10 Clemson team. Yeah, Dwayne Simmons, thank you, was the Georgia player being stepped on there. I think it was it Levon Kirkland who did that, maybe? No, not Kirkland. That wouldn't have been right. They were both defensive players. But the point is that there was some real animosity there between those two programs, and I'd love to see it get back to that. But unfortunately, they've played so little. 91 was a big Georgia win there. Obviously you had the two wins for Georgia in 02 and 03. Clemson getting the win there in Clemson in 2013, raucous environment there. Georgia returning the favor, I guess, in 2014 back in the Athens home game. I'd love for it to get back to that, but unfortunately there's just a limited amount of history here over the course of these last couple of decades, so it has probably fallen down a few pegs, but there's going to be a lot of energy around that game this year, and it's the kind of thing, and Jordan, I'm sure from a Clemson side, you'd probably agree with this, it's the kind of thing that you hope has some carryover, where if they were to rematch in a college football playoff or playing each other in future years, all of a sudden some of this shared history kind of comes back up a little bit. I'd like to see that anyway. All right, I'm going to take one or two more comments, then we're going to go. DMart42, happy to see Mike Davis, speaking of Clemson, former Clemson running back with the Falcons. Yita Cookie says the 91 game against Clemson was the second UGA game I'd ever gone to. Yeah, that was really cool. It was back when Georgia had kind of just expanded the stadium. So you had Georgia had gone from 82,000, 85,000 and kind of extended those bleachers below the bridge. That was kind of the first year that was in place. That was kind of a fun thing. I think it was the first year that was in place. The other thing I'll always remember the Georgia-Clemson game for in 1991, it was the night that the Braves had won the National League West for the first time, the worst to first season in 91. So you actually had kind of a nice moment before the game where many Clemson fans, in fact, most Clemson fans, probably also Atlanta Braves fans. So there was Braves had beaten the Astros back when the Astros were still in the National League to clinch the National League West. And you had a moment before the game where the Redcoats played the tomahawk chop, and really all the fans, Georgia fans and Clemson fans, kind of took a moment to celebrate that. It's just one of those. And I was in the 8th grade, I think, maybe. So that's one of those great moments as a sports fan where, like, you're just like, oh man, Georgia's playing a top 10 team. Braves just won the division. Young, got no responsibilities. Life was very good for a probably 13 or so year old, maybe 14-year-old BA back with the Braves in the playoffs. Georgia beating a top 10 team. It was fun days back in October of or maybe it was September of 1991. Let's see what else. Did I say the wrong school for Mike Davis? Maybe I did. I'm sorry. I guess I said the wrong school for Mike Davis. I apologize for that. Randy Hall enjoyed the interview with Jalen Walker. Yeah, good stuff. I mean, Walker's he's a smooth guy now. He's I'd give anything to have been as polished and smooth as some of these recruits are. Jalen Walker included, for sure. Chad Buchanan says, I make him feel old because I was in the 8th grade in 1991. Yeah, there's by the time everybody gets to be adults, everybody's just sort of the same age. But there are a few things where, like, age differences feel a little bit more substantial when you're in, like, different levels of school. All right, we're going to get ready to go here. Jermaine King doing a little Braves talk. Yeah, I'm excited about this 3 o'clock today in Philadelphia. Wonder how cold it'll be in Philly. They're even having fans and stuff there in Philadelphia. I think they got, that's only about a 30,000 seat ballpark. I think they're opening up for about 10,000 or so in Philadelphia right now. So you clearly see a movement back towards returning to sports here, which is kind of a nice thing to be able to see. I mentioned the AJC a little earlier, name, image, likeness reporting. This actually coming from sort of outside the sports world, reporting from the Georgia General Assembly, the legislative session. Georgia's lawmaking body that meets nearly a portion of the year. That session's coming to a close. A name, image, and likeness bill does pass, and so you can get more about that. AJC.com. You can get your Atlanta news now there. Here's what else you can get today. Coronavirus restrictions being eased in the state. You can find out some more about that. What the city of Atlanta is doing to fight some crime. You can talk about that. Also, there's all kinds of news that we're not even going to get into, but I'm sure you're curious about what's going on there. You can read about that online. Atlanta News Now, AJC.com. Braves coverage of opening day, always a really cool thing. I love the bunting and the things like that you get, like the red, white, and blue banners that hang. I just love all the pageantry of opening day, and really now opening day kind of extends for a couple of days. So enjoy it for those of you who enjoy that kind of thing. Also, speaking of Tourist Park where the Braves play, Battery Atlanta, some new kind of restaurant stuff on the way there. So all of that, Atlanta News Now online, AJC.com. Hope you enjoy that. Thank you for being here for our R.S. Andrews cool down. R.S. Andrews is the one to turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric needs. They show up on time, do the work that's promised, for the price that's promised. Find them online at rsandrews.com. You'll have a great day. See you back here tomorrow morning, 10 a.m. for DawgNation Daily, presented by Merriweather and Tharp. We'll look forward to talking to you then, everybody.